Hey, hello friends, and welcome to Retro Portal Studio. And in this video we're going to be taking a look at creating this custom shaped bottom navigation bar in Flutter. You can see that the shape of this navigation bar is quite complex, and the main focus of this tutorial is to teach you how to create these shapes using Custom Paint in Flutter. Once the shape is done, we'll align the elements and this loading action button in the center of this bottom navigation bar. So let's get started. Okay, so right now I'm in a simple Flutter app in which I just have this my home page. This my home page is a stateful widget, and in the build function of my home page I'm returning a scaffold. The body of the scaffold is just a container, and the background color of the scaffold is set to colors.white10. So to create the base app, the first thing that I'll do is I'll remove the container and instead I'll add a stack. We need a stack here because we want to position the navigation bar to the bottom of the screen, and we want to display the contents of the app behind the bottom navigation bar. So in the stack, I'll add the children property, and in the children property, I'll add a positioned widget. In the positions, I'll pass in the position of bottom to 0 and left to 0. Now for the child, I'll pass in a container, and in the top of the build function, I'll create a new variable of size and give it the value of mediaQuery.offContext.size. In the container, I'll add the width property, and here I'll pass in size.width, and for the height, I'll give it a constant of 80. The next thing that we need to do is we need to add a child to this container, and this child is also going to be a stack. The reason we need a stack here is because we want to create a shape using Custom Paint, and we want the shape to be behind the icons that we add to the bottom navigation bar. So once again, I'll add the children property, and just to show something on the screen, I'll add a color to the container, and I'll set this color to colors.white. So you can see that at this point we have a simple container with a height of 80 at the bottom of the screen with the help of this stack that we added right here. Now for the first child of the stack, we need to add a custom paint. And the first thing we'll do with this custom paint is give it a size, and the size is going to be an instance of size class with the width of size.width and a height of 80. Next, we'll add the painter property to this custom paint, and for this we need to create our own custom painter. For this, I'll come down, and here I'll create a new class, and I'll name this BNB Custom Painter. And this class will extend the Custom Painter base class. You can see that the IDE is indicating us to override two functions. The first one is this paint function, and the second one is this should repaint function. For the should repaint function, I'll just simply return false, and all the work that we need to do is going to be in this paint function. First, I'll come up to the custom paint, and I'll pass in an instance of BNB Custom Painter. Now I'll move down to the BNB Custom Painter, and let's take a look at how we can create that path for the bottom navigation bar. But first, we need to understand the concept of quadratic Bezier curves. So a quadratic Bezier curve uses a reference point, which in this case is P1, and it uses this reference point in creating an arc from P0 to P2, which are the points of source and destination respectively. We'll be using this method of creating curves extensively for creating our bottom navigation bar. You can read more about these curves in the article, the link for which will be in the description of this video. Back to the code. The first thing that I'll do in this paint function is create a paint object, and I'll name this paint. I'll put this equal to a new instance of paint. I'll set its property of color to colors.white. Along with this, again using the double dot operator, I'll set the style and put it equal to paintingstyle.fill. Next, I'll create a new instance of path, and I'll set the initial point of this path using the move_to function, and I'll set it to 0, 20, where 0 is for x and 20 is for y. For what I'm about to do next, it will be a good idea if we take a look at the graphic that I've just created to make you understand. In this illustration, W is the width and H is the height. And you can see that we have these black dots in the four corners, that is 0, 0, W0, WH, and 0H. These four dots represent the container in which we have the bottom navigation bar. Along with this, you can see that we have these orange points that is at 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. These points are joined together by the path that we're going to create in the custom paint. Other than these orange points, we're going to use these green points, which are the reference points for our quadratic Bezier curves. So let's see how this is going to be useful. We're going to start the path from this point of 0, 20, that is the first point, and we're going to create a quadratic Bezier curve to this point 2, that is at 0.35% of the width and a height of 0. And the reference point for this quadratic Bezier curve is going to be at 0.20% of the width and a height of 0. When we'll move from point 2 to point 4, we're going to use a reference point for this quadratic Bezier curve, and that will be at 0.40% of the width and a height of 0. When the path reaches at 0.4, we're going to create an arc from 0.4 to 0.6, and from 0.6 to 8, we're going to again use the quadratic Bezier curve function with a reference point at 0.60% of the width and a height of 0. From 0.8 to 10, we're going to create a quadratic Bezier curve again, and this time the reference point will be at 0.80% of the width and a height of 0. When creating custom paths like this, it is always a great idea to create an illustration with the help of which you can estimate the points and the functions that you will use to create the path, and once that is done, it will be easy for you to code them in the custom paint. Back in the code, let's create a path by using this illustration down below. First thing I'll do is I'll use the canvas and draw path on it using the draw path function and give it the path and paint object. Now, whatever changes we make to the path, we'll be able to see them in the emulator on the right hand side. One thing you can notice is that we have the path set to the initial point of 0, 20 using this move to function. So the next thing that we have to do is we have to draw a quadratic Bezier curve from point 0, 20 to 0.35% of the width and height of 0. And the reference point for that will be this 0.3, that is 0.20% of the width and a height of 0. So let's use the path and create a quadratic Bezier curve. And in this quadratic Bezier curve, the point x1, y1 should be of the reference point. For this, I'll pass in size.width into 0.20, and for the y, I'll pass in 0, and for the x2 and y2, I'll pass in the width of size.width into 0.35 and a height of 0. That is this point right here. From here, we again need to draw a quadratic Bezier curve, and this time the reference point will be the 0.5, that is 0.40% of the width and height of 0. So I'll pass in those values, and the x2 and y2 point will be this 0.4, and the value for this is 0.40% of the width and a height of 20. So I'll pass in size.width into 0.40 and height of 20. Now we need to draw an arc from 0.4 to 0.6. And here we need to pass an offset for the end of the arc. For this, I'll give it an instance of offset, and for the x value, I'll pass in size.width into 0.60 and a height of 20. Along with this, I'll also pass in a radius, and for this, I'll use the radius class and use the circular constructor, and I'll pass in a value of 10.0. Along with the radius, we also need to pass in a clockwise property and set it to false. At this point, if I save the app, you can see that there is no change in the bottom bar, and the reason for this is that in the container we have passed in the color of white. So I'll remove this and save the app again, and you can see that there is a weird shape in the bottom bar at this point. So I'll come back to the paint function, and I'll continue with the path using this illustration below. So once we have drawn the arc, we again need to create a quadratic Bezier curve from 0.6 to 0.8 and then 0.8 to 0.10. using the reference points of 7 and 9 respectively. So instead of writing them on screen, I'll just skip the part. So once we have all the quadratic curves in place, we are now at the point 10 in the illustration. Now what we need to do is we need to create simple lines, that is using path.line2, and now we need to move from point 10 to w, h. And for this we can simply pass in size.width and size.height. From this we can draw a line to point 0, size.height, that is this point right here. And in the end we can use path.close function to close the path. At this point, if I save the app, you can see that we have the shape ready to be used in the bottom navigation bar. One thing you can do is before drawing the path, you can also use canvas.drawShadow, and in this function you need to pass in the path. For this you can create your own path, or you can use the same path here. We also need to pass in the color, so we'll pass in colors.black. For the elevation, I'll pass in 5, and for the transparent occluder, I'll just pass in true. As the background for this scaffold is black, so you won't be able to notice this shadow right here. Now, as the custom painter is ready, we can move back to the stack where we have the custom paint, and we have passed in the painter of BNB custom painter. For the second child of the stack, we can add a floating action button that we can show at the center of the bottom navigation bar. For this, I'll simply add the center widget, and in this, I'll pass in a child, a floating action button. For the onPressed, I'll pass in an empty function. And along with the onPressed, I'll add in a property of background color and pass in the color of colors.orange. For the child of the floating action button, I'll add an icon, and for the icon, I'll use icons.shopping-basket. I'll also set the elevation to 0.1, and at this point, if I save the app, you can see that the floating action button is at the center of the bottom navigation bar, but this is not the correct position. What we can do here is we can simply add the height factor to the center widget, and I can set its value to 0.6. Now, the floating action button is exactly at the position that we want it to be. What this height factor does is that it takes the factor and it multiplies that by the height of the child and uses the resulting height as the height of the center widget. To learn more about this height factor, you can check out my tutorial on center widget in the Flutter Widget Essential series. Next thing we can do is we can add a third child to the stack, and this time this is going to be a container. I'll set the width of the container to size.width and the height of the container will be 80. For the child of the container, I'll add in a row because we want all the icons to be aligned horizontally in the bottom navigation bar. For the row, I'll add the children property, and in this, I'll add an icon button. For the icon in the icon button, I'll pass in an icon widget, and I'll use icons.home. And for the onPress property, I'll pass in an empty function. I'll duplicate this icon button 3 more times, and for the second button, I'll change the icon to restaurant menu, bookmark, and notifications. At this point, if I save the app, you can see that all the icons are aligned to the left side of the bottom navigation bar. For this, what we can simply do is we can add the main axis alignment to the row, and for this I can set the value of main axis alignment dot space evenly. If I save the app, you can see that the icons are now aligned evenly in the bottom navigation bar, but the second and third icon are not at the position that we want them to be. For this, what we can simply do is after the second icon, we can add a container, and we can set its width to size.width into 0.20. If I save the app now, you can see that all the icons are now aligned in the way that we want. And with this, we have this bottom navigation bar design ready to use. So in this tutorial, you have seen that just by using some simple tips and tricks, we can create complex paths like this and use the powerful Custom Paint widget for complex designs. I hope you find this video useful, and if you do, please make sure to hit the like and subscribe button, and also consider supporting me via the links in the description below. See you next time. Peace.